Let's go, baby!
Ahí tenemos a nuestro primo.
Let's go, laptop! Andy's on time!
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. While the unemployment rate remains low, it has edged up. Job gains have slowed, and downside risks to employment have risen. At the same time, inflation has risen recently and remains somewhat elevated. In support of our goals, and in light of the shift in the balance of risks, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to lower our policy interest rate by a quarter percentage point.
De momento no ha dicho nada.
We also decided to continue to reduce our securities holdings. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that growth of economic activity has moderated. GDP rose at a pace of around 1.5% in the first half of the year, down from 2.5% last year. The moderation in growth largely reflects a slowdown in consumer spending. In contrast, business investment in equipment and intangibles has picked up from last year's pace. Activity in the housing sector remains weak. In our summary of economic projections, the median participant projects GDP to rise 1.6% this year and 1.8% next year, a touch stronger than projected in June. In the labor market, the unemployment rate edged up to 4.3% in August, but remains little changed over the
No ha dicho nada y lo poco que ha dicho yo diría que es más negativo que positivo, pero bueno.
past year at a relatively low level. Payroll job gains have slowed significantly to a pace of just 29,000 per month over the past 3 months. A good part of the slowing likely reflects a decline in the growth of the labor force due to lower immigration and lower labor force participation. Even so, labor demand has softened, and the recent pace of job creation appears to be running below the break-even rate needed to hold the unemployment rate constant.
Bearish!
In addition, wage growth has continued to moderate while still outpacing inflation. Overall, the marked slowing in both the supply of and demand for workers is unusual. In this less dynamic and somewhat softer labor market, the downside risks to employment appear to have risen. In our SEP,
Lo que está diciendo es más
the
bueno que
median
más malo que
projection for the
bueno, y el
unemployment
mercado
rate
sí
is
lo piensa.
4.5% at the end of this year and edges down thereafter. Inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer-run goal. Estimates based on the Consumer Price Index and other data indicate that total PCE prices rose 2.7% over the 12 months ending in August, and that, excluding the
Inflación al
volatile
2,7.
food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.9%. These readings are higher than earlier in the year as inflation for goods has picked up. In contrast, disinflation appears to be continuing for services. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up, on balance, over the course of this year on news about tariffs, as reflected in both market and survey-based measures. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal.
Porque ha dicho
The
que la
median projection
inflación,
in the
cuidado.
SEP for total PCE inflation is 3.0% this year and falls to 2.6% in 2026 and to 2.1% in 2027. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. At today's meeting, the committee decided to lower the target range for the federal funds rate by a quarter percentage point to 4 to 4.25%, and to continue reducing the size of our balance sheet. Changes to government policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. Higher tariffs have begun to push up prices in some
De
categories
momento lo que dice es más malo que bueno.
of goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation will be relatively short-lived, a one-time shift in the price level. But it is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent, and that is a risk to be assessed and managed. Our obligation is to ensure that a one-time increase in the price level does not become an ongoing inflation problem. In the near term, risks to inflation are tilted to the upside and risks to employment to the downside, a challenging situation. When our goals are in tension like this, our framework calls for us to balance both sides of our dual mandate. With downside risks to employment having increased, the balance of risks has shifted. Accordingly, we judged it appropriate at this meeting to take another step toward a more neutral policy stance. With today's decision, we remain well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate, based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario for the economy. The median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 3.6% at the end of this year,
Mirad la volatilidad,
3.4% at the end of
Se ha ido,
2026, and
o sea, ha sido hablar de la
3.1% at the end of
inflación
2027.
y se ha puesto a subir esto
This path is
como un loco.
1/4 percentage point lower than projected in June. As is always the case, these individual forecasts
extra
are
cut.
subject to uncertainty, and they're not a committee plan or
Lo que no
decision.
entiendo es que por qué
Policy
con
is
este
not on a
discurso
preset course.
eh,
The Fed has been assigned two goals for monetary policy: maximum employment and stable prices. We remain
Han
committed
bajado
to
tipos.
supporting maximum employment, bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping
o sea,
longer-term
el discurso es malo, es decir, oye, bajamos tipos porque el desempleo está subiendo, pero la inflación tenemos miedo, ¿sabes?
inflation expectations well anchored.
Entonces, la parte de la inflación, por supuesto que ha jodido a los bonos.
Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that
Mira,
our
y el
actions
eurodólar
affect
lo ha
communities,
recogido todo.
families, and businesses
Porque es
across the
bastante
country.
negativo el speech, ¿eh?
Everything we do is in service to our public mission, and we at the Fed will do everything we
Suena
can
bajamos tipos porque
to
no lo ha dicho
achieve our
Trump,
maximum
¿sabes?
employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to our
No ha dicho
discussion.
nada. Bueno,
Okay, he
nada.
highlighted that extra cut because they realized those downside risks. Let's go see what the questions are now.
Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. As you know, Fed Governor
is
Stephen
dovish
Byron
so far.
has
¿Ves? Lo ha
continued,
dicho. O sea, esto no, vamos, o sea,
kept his position at the White House, even as he's joined the Fed board. This is
Yep.
the first time, I believe, the Fed's board has had someone with executive branch ties in decades. Does this compromise the Fed's independence from day-to-day politics? And
Nope.
relatedly, how can you
Absolutely
maintain
not.
the public's perception the Fed is politically
And no
independent with
comment.
this dynamic? Thank you.
So we did welcome a new committee member today, as we always do, and the committee remains united in pursuing our dual mandate goals. We're strongly committed to maintaining our independence, and beyond that, I really don't have anything to share.
Fair. Totally fair.
I'm sorry. You,
Fijaros, chat,
you
más
and
uno.
other Fed officials have spoken extensively about the impact of tariffs on inflation, although perhaps with many companies appearing to eat the tariffs, tariffs may be impacting the labor market and other parts of the economy instead. Do you see that as a possible outcome here, that tariffs
I just sent out a buy alert to the Alpha Report members, by the way, if you're in the Meet Kevin membership.
in inflation?
ves en mínimos el SP.
You know, it's certainly possible. You know, we're beginning to see, we have begun to
Mira.
see goods prices showing through into higher inflation, and actually the increase in goods prices accounts for most of the increase in inflation, or perhaps all of the increase in inflation over the course of this year. Those are not very large effects at this point, and we do expect them to continue to build over the course of the rest of the year and into next year. And you know, it's also possible and that there may be effects on employment, but that I would say if you're looking at why employment is doing what it's doing, that's much more about the change in immigration. So the supply of workers has obviously come way down. There's very little growth, if any, in the supply of workers. And at the same time, demand for workers has also come down quite sharply, and to the point where we see
Nos las prometíamos muy felices con el statement del principio, pero toda la rueda de prensa es mala, ¿sabes? Es mala en general. Y suena, no sabemos bien lo que estamos haciendo.
what I've called a curious balance. It's, you know, typically when we say things are in balance, that sounds good, but in
O
this
sea, el speech del mes pasado me convenció, me gusta, o sea, a mí Powell no me disgusta, pero este carece un poco de lógica, ¿sabes? Ha sido en plan, oye, no sabemos bien qué preferimos, si un puñetazo en la cara o una patada a los huevos, ¿sabes? No sabemos si bajar tipos y a ver qué pasa con la inflación o no bajarlos y que el mercado de empleo siga mal.
In this case, the balance is because both supply and demand have come down quite sharply. Now demand coming down a little more sharply because we now see the unemployment rate edging up.
Nick Timrose of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, do economic conditions and the balance of risks no longer warrant a restrictive policy setting?
So I don't think we can say that. What we can say is this, that over the course of this year, we've kept our policy at a restrictive level, and people have different views, but a clearly restrictive level, I would say. So, and we were able to do that over the course of this year because the labor market was in very solid condition with strong job creation and all those things. I think if you go back to April and now look at the revised job creation numbers for May, June, July, and August, I can no longer say that. So what that means is that the risks were clearly tilted toward inflation. I would say they're moving toward equality. Maybe they're not quite out of equality. We don't need to know that.
Se acaba de decir que antes los riesgos estaban ligados a la inflación y esos mismos riesgos ligados a la inflación ahora se dividen en riesgos de la inflación y riesgos de desempleo.
We do know that they've moved meaningfully toward greater equality, the risks between the two goals, and that suggests that we should be moving in the direction of neutral, and that's what we did today.
Under what circumstances would a larger than 25 basis points rate cut be warranted? And how seriously was that option entertained at your meeting this week?
There wasn't widespread support at all for a 50 basis point cut today. You know, I think we've done very large rate hikes and very large rate cuts in the last 5 years.
Esto es lo que, bueno, muchos ya sabéis, ¿vale? Este empinamiento de la curva, si van a bajar tipos a corto, pues por supuesto que toda la renta fija de corto, ¿sabes? De un año para abajo, pues por supuesto que claro que sube, ¿sabes? Porque esto se da por hecho, esto va a ocurrir. Pero todo lo que es a largo está dando por hecho de que, claro, me estás diciendo que está bajando tipos, pero no está nada seguro con la inflación, pues esto, miedito por aquí. Miedito por aquí y por ahí, pues mal, ¿sabes? Pero bueno. O sea, en realidad lo que nos las prometíamos muy felices, pero vamos, el discurso no es nada convincente de nada.
And you tend to do those at a time when you feel that policy is out of place and needs to move quickly to a new place. That's not at all what I feel certainly now. I feel like our policy has been doing the right thing so far this year. I think we were right to wait and see how tariffs and inflation and the labor market evolved. I think we're now reacting to the much lower level of job creation and other evidence of softening in the labor market and saying, well, those risks are maybe not fully balanced, but moving in the direction of balance now. And so that warrants a change in policy.
Colby Smith for the New York Times. Should we be viewing today's cut as the committee taking out some insurance against the possibility that the labor market is at risk of weakening? Or is it the committee's view that the dynamics of a downturn are already in place? I guess I'm just trying to square the shift in the rate forecast in the SEP towards more cuts than just 3 months ago with the fact that the forecast for unemployment didn't change.
Yeah, I think you could think of this in a way as a risk management cut, because if you look at the SEP, actually, the projections for growth this year and next actually ticked up just a little bit, and inflation and unemployment didn't really move much. So what's different now? What's different now is that you see a very different picture of the risks to the labor market. You've seen, we were looking at 150,000 jobs a month at the time of the last meeting, and now we see the revisions.
Mirad, chicos, o sea, esto es lo que cuando muchas veces les explico que nadie tiene ni idea. Tú ven a alguien a explicarle que de 1.18.5 te vas a 1.19.1, que es más de media figura, y de 1.19.1 te vas a 1.18.4. Y ahora venme a explicar que esto se puede tradear, predecir o no sé qué, ¿sabes? Pero bueno, nada que no supierais.
And we see the new numbers. And I don't want to put too much emphasis on payroll job creation, but it's just one of the things that suggests that the labor market is really cooling off. And that tells you that it's time to to take that into account in our, in our policy.
So just looking at the SEP, once again, the median participant has inflation higher than previously expected by the end of next year, and the Fed not getting back to the 2% target until 2028. So I guess I'm just wondering how you characterize the risk to price pressures of...
Yields are going up because he's walking back the dovishness of 3 cuts. I'll explain that, but that's expected. He's going neutral here.
That we need to...
He doesn't want to cause persistent inflation.
Restoring 2% inflation on a sustained basis, and we will do that. At the same time, we've got to weigh the risks to the 2 goals. And I would say since April, to me, the risks of higher and more persistent inflation have probably become a little less. And that's partly because the labor market has softened, GDP growth has slowed.
Mira.
So I would just say that
What's in 26? What do you mean he's not going neutral?
than one might think. And in terms
Well,
of the
Chad,
labor
por lo
market,
menos
what we're
esto es
seeing
bueno para
is
vosotros.
unemployment is still low. It's still a relatively low rate, but we're seeing downside risks.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Radio and Television.
And remember, I did send out a buy alert to those of you in the Meet Kevin membership. Just in case you haven't seen it yet, you should have gotten an alert on the Meet Kevin app. And where else we
The
got some?
employment area is related to immigration, which your rate cuts wouldn't address. How do you see that as
Esto es, ahora mismo esto es muy bajista para el TLT5, ¿eh? Esto que está diciendo.
more important than inflation, which has remained almost a full percentage point above your target?
Well, I was saying that what's happening in the labor market has more to do with immigration than it has to do with tariffs. That was the question I was answering. So I wouldn't say that all of what's happening in the labor market is due to tariffs. I mean, you clearly have a slowing in it due to immigration. You clearly have a slowing in demand, which is now perhaps more than that in supply, and we know that because the unemployment rate has ticked up. So, that's what I meant by that.
We can follow up. Every year since 2015, the SEP has forecast that you would hit your target 2 years later. And this year, this SEP says you're going to hit your target 2 years later. 2% does not seem to be in sight. Does that suggest that the 2% target is not really achievable? And does this present any credibility problems for you in telling
Madre mía.
people that that's what you're going to do
¿Cómo pega
if you
este,
can
tú?
never reach it?
Well, I mean, you're right. It does say we're going to get to 2% inflation in 2028,
Se lo ha
at the end of
explicado.
28. But that's literally how you put the projections together. You're writing down a rate path, which is designed to create over the course of.
Lo de Bitcoin no sabría qué decir cómo, o sea, yo decir cómo lo iba a hacer Bitcoin no tendría ni idea, con lo cual ahí nunca me hubiera mojado.
The SEP, time frame, 2% inflation and maximum employment too. So that's all that is. No one really knows where the economy will be in 3 years, but the nature of the exercise is to write down policy that you believe would return to the 2% goal over at least by the end of the exercise.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth Schulze with ABC News. The latest inflation report shows that prices are still going up across key categories for many households, including groceries. What will the Fed do if prices pick up more?
So our expectation, and you can see this consistently through the year, has been that inflation will move up this year, but that basically because of the effects on goods prices from tariffs, but that those will turn out to be a one-time price increase as opposed to creating an inflationary process. That's been our forecast. Pretty much every forecast.
Eso es bueno.
All the individual forecasts say that. We can't just assume that, though, right? We have to. Our job is literally to make sure that is what happens, and we will do that job. Right now, the situation we're in is that we see inflation. We continue to expect it to move up, maybe not as high as we would have expected it to move up a few months ago. The pass-through of the tariffs into inflation has been slower and smaller. The labor market has softened.
Es medio político, ¿eh? ¿Cómo decir cosas sin decir nada, eh?
So the case for there being a persistent inflation outbreak is less. And so that's why we think it's time for us really to acknowledge that the risks to the other mandate have grown and that we should move in the direction of neutral. So what will we do? We'll do what we need to
Mínimos,
do,
¿eh?
but we have two mandates and we try to balance them.
Prácticamente.
For a long time, our framework says that
They're
when our
getting
two
nervous.
goals are in tension, this is
They're
quite an
getting
unusual
nervous.
situation. How do we decide what to do? Because our tools can't do two things at once. What we do is we ask which is farther from, how far is each from the goal and how long is it expected to get to the goal. So, and then we think about those things and we see, as I mentioned, our policy had been really skewed toward inflation for a long time, really. Now we see that there's downside risk clearly in the labor market, and so we're moving in the direction of more neutral policy.
How concerned are you about the slowdown in the jobs market for households at home, especially younger Americans struggling to land a job?
So
Esto un poco ambiguo todo, pero más malo que bueno en general. Ahora, cuando acabe, si queréis, os doy un poco
it's
mi
an
opinión.
interesting labor market, and obviously we think it's appropriate
Aquí no hay nadie que entienda nada. Ahora os lo explico.
that we reduce our rates so that we become more neutral, which presumably will be better for the labor market. You see people who are sort of more at the margins, so kids coming out of college and younger people, minorities are having a hard time finding
Bueno,
jobs.
por
The
lo
overall
menos esto sirve para explicaros que nadie tiene ni idea de nada, ¿sabes? O sea, bueno, ahora os explico cómo leo yo este movimiento, ¿vale? Porque Mira, voy a hacer un vídeo para el canal secundario y así lo explico, ¿sabes? O incluso para el canal principal, ¿sabes? Eso, los que tengáis Prime, suscribiros con Amazon Prime, que es gratis. Porque es muy interesante el día de hoy, ¿vale? Porque hay como dos mensajes.
job finding rate is very, very low. However, the layoff rate is also very low. So you've got a low firing, low hiring environment. And the concern is that if you start to see layoffs, the people who are laid off there won't be a lot of hiring going on. So that could very quickly flow into higher unemployment. In a healthier economy, healthier labor market, there would be jobs for those people. But now the hiring rate is very, very low. So that's been a
fijaros
growing
cómo ha
concern
corregido
over the
todo,
last few months.
Mirad ese
And it's one of the
mínimos.
reasons why we think it's appropriate that we begin to shift our policy focus toward a more balanced one.
Esto me da para vídeo, chicos.
Steve Leisman, CNBC. Mr. Chair,
Ahora os explico
in
todo,
the
¿eh?
past, during rate cuts, you used the word recalibration. And I wonder if you pointedly did not use it this time. And in fact, when you said policy is not on a preset course, did you mean that as sort of the opposite of recalibration? Are we meeting to meeting, data point by data point? Are we in the process here of getting back to neutral? Thank you.
So I think we're in a meeting.
No, nadie tiene que salir de nada, chicos. O sea, no es nada grave ni nada tal, ¿sabes? Pero hay un tema de incertidumbre importante que ahora os explico.
A meeting situation. We're going to be looking at the data. Let me say a word about the SEP really here. So we often point this out. What the SEP is it's an accumulation of the individual projections of 19 people, showing what they believe at a particular moment in time to be the most likely path for the economy and thus the appropriate path for monetary policy as well. And as you know, we don't debate or try to agree on what that is. We just write them down and accumulate them. We do sometimes discuss them. And so we always say we're not on a preset path, and we really mean that. The actual decisions we make are going to be based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
I'm going to explain all of this, by the way. I know what's happening, and it will all make sense in a moment.
10 participants out of 19 who wrote down 2 or more cuts for the remainder of the year, and 9 who wrote down fewer than, in fact, in a good number of cases, no more cuts. So rather than looking at this as certainty, I would encourage people, as always, to look at the SEP as through the lens of probability. And so there are different possible outcomes and likelihoods rather than this one is certain and this one isn't happening. So that's what I would say.
Thank you for
Una
getting
figura.
to my follow-up question, which was, is the dispersion in the outlook a sign of uncertainty of policy in the meetings to come? Thank you.
You know, it is such an unusual situation. Ordinarily, when the labor market is weak, inflation is low. And when the labor market is really strong, that's when you've got to be careful about inflation. So we have a situation where we have two-sided risk. And that means there's no risk-free path. And so it's quite a difficult situation for policymakers. And it's not at all surprising to me that you have a range of views. It's not so much about having different views for the path of the economy, but it's partly that. But it's also partly about what's the right thing to do in light of this, of the tension between the two goals. How do you weight them? How worried are you about one versus the other? And so it's natural. I think it would actually be surprising if you didn't have a pretty wide range of views based, in this kind of highly unusual situation. And we do.
Al oro, baja el Bitcoin, mañana no bajéis al parque de Cava.
So, but we get together, we discuss, we have a great discussion, and then we decide what to do and we act. But you're right that it's a wide dispersion of views, and I think that's understandable and natural in the current situation.
Todo lo malo de hoy viene por incertidumbre, no viene por nada más, ¿sabes?
Hi, Victoria Guida with Politico. You've talked a lot about Fed independence and the importance of it over the years, but as markets have questions about what exactly
just a quick spoiler while she talks about Fed independence. What's happening is the Fed markets are nervous that the Fed is indeed going to be too late. He talks about, hey, we're going to get back to 2% inflation. He said a key phrase that turned the market. Job growth is now below break-even rate. That freaked everybody out. Why are yields going up? Because 25 was priced in for days. And he's being neutral. He's not going really dovish here. That's the problem. Neutral means rates up.
By the speeches that people give, by the decisions that we make, you'll know that
this is back on Fed independence. Mind you, and I put this on the Meet Kevin app, so you can see it in the Meet Kevin app. But mind you, I wrote this to course members. Base Powell. We don't think 25 BP move does anything to bonds. Expect flat and slightly up on yields, as I think Powell will talk up the balance of risk, data dependent, meeting by meeting. And we will slowly unprice 6 cuts by March. This is the base case 65% neutral scenario that I gave to course members this morning. And I actually wrote, my take is we're going to see yields up after Powell today because he's not bearish enough. People think he's going to be too late.
Work exactly as we always have now. And people are...
You can literally see that. That's literally in the Alpha report. And I do those every single day to give you a heads up of what to look for in the day. MeetKevin.com.
See the court case around Lisa Cook as being related to...
Market path of rates, right? And the market's has already been baking in
25
expectations.
Matter.
I mean, our market works through expectations.
Sí, no. O sea, lo de hoy en mercados, esto... O sea, que digáis la volatilidad del euro-dólar, pues vale, esto más o menos sí es muy volátil, ¿vale? Pero los mercados, o sea, que se te mueva 0,5 el SP, ¿dónde está el problema, sabes? O sea, es una volatilidad para un día como hoy normal. Lo de los bonos también no digo que es una volatilidad bestia, pero como ha hecho un swing bastante importante de arriba abajo, pues sí que ha tenido algo de volatilidad. Entonces, diría que es la volatilidad, esto para hoy, teniendo en cuenta todos los activos, es la volatilidad estándar de lo que podría ser de hecho, creo que hoy es bastante más entretenida que muchas otras que hemos visto porque han pasado muchas cosas.
Right. So I think our policy path really does matter. And I think it's important that we use our tools to support the labor market when we do see signs like that. I did mention that. You see minorities, unemployment going up. You see younger people who are more vulnerable economically.
Black unemployment is a red flag leading indicator.
That's one of the reasons, in addition to just overall lower payroll job creation, that shows you that at the margin the labor market is weakening. I would also point to labor force participation. Some part of the significant decline in labor force participation over the last year has probably been cyclical in nature rather than just the usual aging process. So we put all those together, and we see that the labor market is softening, and we don't need it to soften anymore, don't want it to. So we use our tools, and it starts with a 25 basis point rate cut, but the market's also pricing in a rate path. I'm not blessing what the market's doing at all. I'm just saying it's not just one action.
As a follow-up to that, the growth mix right now seems very concentrated in investment, and on the consumer spending side, in the higher income groups. Do you feel that that's an unsustainable mix for the economy moving forward?
No, ahora mismo el TLT es más bajista que alcista, chicos. De todas formas, con lo que hemos hablado en el canal del TLT a niveles de 5, 5 y pico, 4,90 o tal, coño, estáis al 4,64. No sé qué hacéis ahí, qué queréis, el Golden Trade, forraros o qué.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, you're right. Those are two. We're getting unusually large amounts of economic activity through the AI build out and corporate investment. I don't know how long that will go on. No one does. In terms of spending, you saw that the consumer spending numbers were well above expectations, and that may well be skewed toward higher earning consumers. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that.
Yes.
Nonetheless,
The
it's
rich are spending.
So, I mean, I think the economy is moving along. Economic growth is going to be 1.5% or better this year, maybe a little better. Forecasts have been coming up, as you can see. So, labor market unemployment is low, but downside risks, but it's still a low unemployment rate. So, that's how we see it.
A mí la volatilidad,
It's a mistake, man.
Hi, Stephanie Rule, MSNBC. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said that the Federal Reserve suffers from mission creep and institutional bloat. He's now calling for an independent
los
review.
chicharros,
Would you support an independent review, or are you open to any sort of reform in any areas of the
Mirad
Fed?
este pedazo de Ponzi, chicos.
I, of course, am not going to comment on anything the Secretary says or really any other officer says. So in terms of reform at the Fed, we just went through a lengthy and I think very successful process of updating our monetary policy framework. I would say there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes around the assets we have in the Federal Reserve,
Rubén y media,
Federal
¿vale?
Reserve System
Rubén y
and
media
at the
porque
board.
aquí hay tela que cortar.
Are they the right size? We're actually going through a 10% at 10%
La renta fija europea le va a afectar un poco. ¿sabes?
headcount reduction through the whole Fed, including the board and all the reserve banks. The employment at the Fed at the end of that will be basically at the same level it was more than 10 years ago. So we will have had zero job growth for more than a decade when we're finished with that, and I think we'll probably do more than that. So I think we're certainly open to constructive criticism and ways to do our jobs better.
Not an independent review?
We're certainly open to to always trying to do better.
Mr. Chairman, Neil Irwin with Axios. There's been some debate lately on whether AI is already starting to affect the labor market in terms of lower labor demand, higher productivity by contrast. Do you buy that? And if that is true, does that have implications for the monetary policy setting?
So there's great uncertainty around that. I think my view, which is also a bit of a guess but widely shared, I think, is that you are seeing some effects, but it's not the main thing driving it. And so particular focus on young people coming out of college. And yeah, there may be something there. It may be that companies or other institutions that have been hiring younger people right out of college are able to use AI more than they had in the past. That may be part of the story. It's also part of the story, though, that job creation more broadly has slowed down. The economy has slowed down. And so it's probably a number of things. But yeah, it's probably a factor. Hard to say how big it is.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. What evidence do you see of tariffs showing up in inflation?
Well, if you can take goods, just sort of the broad goods category. And last year, goods inflation was negative. If you go back 25 years, that was the typical thing, was that goods inflation was, goods prices generally went down, even adjusting for quality. So that was not the case during the pandemic, of course. Goods inflation went very high, but we had essentially returned to zero or slightly negative inflation. Now, I think goods inflation over the course of the past year is 1.2%, which
Vamos a hacer un vídeo y dejamos esto tal, ¿no?
analysts have different views, but
Aunque
we
me,
think
me
it's
gustaría, por
contributing,
complementar
you
mi
know,
idea, me
0.3
gustaría
or 0.4, something like that, to the
que él
current
diera su
core
opinión, que la iba a
PCE
dar al
inflation
acabar.
view on that for you today.
Hi, Katarina Saraiva with
Sí, me imagino que Noble y todas las energéticas al pozo.
Bloomberg News. I just wanted to follow up on one of your answers just a couple minutes ago. We've often heard you talk about how you and your colleagues, do not think about politics. This does not enter the room. But one of your new colleagues does come from this world, right, where everything is seen through this framework of politics and of what party is being helped, and that person is still employed by the White House.
¿Esto afecta al mercado europeo? De momento no, porque en general lo que estamos viendo es volatilidad, incertidumbre y tal, y entiendo que el veredicto final en el día sea ni fu ni fa, o un ligero verde o un ligero rojo, ¿vale? Porque hay noticias buenas y noticias malas, y el mercado ni siquiera se pone de acuerdo en qué pesa más, ¿sabes? Si el empujón a la economía con la baja de tipos o la incertidumbre. Ahora, cuando antes era solo una variable, que era la inflación, ahora es con la inflación y con el datos de empleo. O sea, como los datos de empleo, los futuros datos de empleo sean malos, nos vamos a ir al pozo, pero no os quiero decir cómo.
I think that is the way the institution, that's in the DNA of the institution. That's not going to change.
And then I wanted to ask about a Gallup poll that showed that Americans now have more confidence in the president than the Federal Reserve when it comes to doing what's right for the economy. Why do you think that is? And what's your response? What's your message to the public?
Our response is we're going to do everything we can to use our tools to achieve the goals that Congress has given us, and we're not going to get distracted by anything. So I think that's what we're going to do. We're just going to keep doing our jobs.
Claire Jones, Financial Times. Given the range of views expressed prior to the meeting, I think there was a lot less dissent today than a lot of people expected.
Ya está flat el
It'd be good
SP.
to know just what you think the drivers were of coming to that very strong consensus in the meeting, and also on the flip side to just explain why the dot plots are really so scattered between, someone even expecting rates to end up higher by the end of the year to 5 cuts. I mean, what were the kind of range of views you had about, on one side, why there was so much support for a cut today, and on the flip side, why there's so much divergence about what comes next?
So I think there's quite a wide
Hombre, si al final recupera todo, es bastante fortaleza la que presenta el mercado, porque esta rueda de prensa es más mala que buena, en mi opinión, aunque hay motivos para pensar una cosa y la contraria.
The situation has changed with respect to the labor market. Whereas we could still say, and did say in July, at the time of the July meeting, that the labor market was in solid condition, and we could point to 150,000 jobs per month and many other things.
La chica preguntó qué opinaba de que los americanos creyeran que Trump era más válido para saber cuál es la política necesaria económica para el país que ellos. ¿Sabes? Como diciendo, sois unos pringaos, ¿sabes?
That the new data that we've had, and it's not just payrolls, it's other things as well, suggests that there really is meaningful downside risk. I said there was downside risk then, but I think that downside risk is now a reality, and there's clearly more downside risk. So I think that's broadly accepted. And so that meant different things for different people. Some wrote down, almost everyone wrote down, supported this cut, and some supported more cuts and some didn't, as you will see from the dot plot. So that's just the way it is. I mean, people have, you have people who take this work very seriously, think about it all the time, do their work, discuss it with our colleagues. We endlessly discuss this between ourselves, and then we have a meeting where we put it all out on the table, and this is what you get. And you're right, there's a range of views in the dots, and I think that's, like I said, very unsurprising given the quite unusual, historically unusual nature of the challenges that we face. But let's remember, though, the unemployment rate's 4.3%. The economy's growing at 1.5%. So, it's not a bad economy or anything like that. We've seen much more challenges.
Market's going green right after we bought the dip. Let's go.
We're trying to accomplish. It's challenging to know what to do. There are, as I mentioned earlier, there are no risk-free paths now. It's not incredibly obvious what to do. So we have to keep our eye on inflation. At the same time, we cannot ignore and must keep our eye on maximum employment, which is those are our two equal goals. And you will see that there are a range of views on what to do. Nonetheless, we came together today at the meeting and acted with a high degree of unity.
Thank you. Archie Hall from The Economist. You mentioned earlier that job creation was running below your guess at its break-even rate. I'd be curious to hear a bit more about that and where you think the break-even rate is.
So there are many different ways to calculate it, and none of them is perfect. But it's clearly come way down. You could say it's somewhere between 0 and 50,000, and you'd be right or wrong. I mean, there's just many different ways to do it. So wherever it was, 150,000, 200,000 a few months ago, it's come down quite significantly, and that's because a very lower amount of people are joining the labor force. The labor force really not growing much at this point, and that's a lot of where the supply of labor was coming from over the last 2 or 3 years. So we're not getting that now. We've got much lower demand. It's interesting that supply and demand have really come down together
Pues al
so
final,
far.
el único verdadero perjudicado, porque el eurodólar ha aguantado,
unemployment ticking up outside, just
SP
one
ha
tick
aguantado,
outside of the
y el único verdadero
range where it's
perjudicado es
been
la
for a
renta
year.
fija.
4.3% is still a low level, but I think this level of this speedy decline in both supply and demand has certainly gotten everyone's attention.
Follow up, if I may. You mentioned the downside risk to employment a fair amount, but it's striking that measures of kind of activity and output for the third quarter, those that we have, seem pretty strong. The Atlanta Fed's GDP now is very strong. You mentioned strong PCE numbers as well. How do you square those things? Is there a chance actually could be upside?
Sí, la
risk to the
renta
labor
fija este
market
año
if
pilla
activity
siempre.
measures are right?
Well, that would be great. We'd love that to happen.
Bueno, Bitcoin y oro yo no llevo.
So I don't know that you see a big tension there, but it's
Sí, la
gratifying
renta
to
fija
see
corporativa
that
bien.
economic activity is holding in.
Sobre todo
it's a
renta
good-
fija
a good
gubernamental
bit
de
from
medio largo plazo.
consumption. It looks like consumption was stronger than expected. What we got earlier this
He vendido
this
SP500
week.
por miedo y ahora veo que está
And
prácticamente
also
en
we're
verde.
getting,
Pero ¿cómo vendéis
a
con
fairly
movimientos
narrow
de
sector
0,50?
is producing
Todos los que tenéis SP500 es a largo plazo.
AI build out and
No entiendo qué hacéis
business
jugando a ser
investment.
traders,
So,
¿sabes?
we watch all of it, and I would say we did move up. The median for growth for this year actually moved up in the SEP between the June and September SEPs. So
Bueno, yo creo que vamos a hacer un vídeo de esto, ¿no?